Hello and welcome to a new episode of BIMvoice. Today, it's a little bit more special episode. I have two guests with me, the founders of Speckle, Dimitrie Stefanescu and Matteo Cominetti. I hope I pronounced the Italian name right, Matteo.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Because Romanian one, I'm Romanian, so it was easy.
It's easy.
Yeah, welcome guys. Please present yourself in order.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for having us, Petru. And yes, like you pronounce Matteo's name perfectly well, so it's no issues there. So yeah, I'm Dimitrie. I started Speckle maybe some time ago, maybe almost 6 years ago now, like 2015, as a research project inside UCL. And yeah, since then many things have changed, but I guess we'll we'll talk about the story later. I'll let Matteo introduce himself.
Yeah, Matteo, co-founder of Speckle, actually was one of the very early collaborators, contributors to the project.
First contributor, dude. Yeah,
first official contributor. Wow.
Yes, outside of Anyway, go ahead.
And then for a while, I was a co-worker of Dimitrie while we were at Arup, and then we decided, to shape up a proper company around the project, and here we are.
Nice. What is Speckle? Can you please share your screen and tell me briefly what is Speckle and what it does?
Man, this is a complicated exercise that we're continuously undergoing and revising. Like, what is Speckle and what's the elevator pitch, Matteo? We never really have a good elevator pitch, really.
Oh, we can start by saying what problems we're trying to solve with Speckle, right? That's always a good reminder of the status of the industry and why the project is there.
True. Yeah. So, I mean, the current tagline of Speckle is that we want to empower your design and construction data. The problems that we're simply trying to solve, or where Speckle originated kind of as a, its reasons of existence, its original ones was simply like kind of help collaboration and help kind of, that also meant interoperability, obviously, but mostly it was to help collaboration between all the stakeholders within AEC to have kind of, let's say, data-informed discussions, if you will, right? And that's, again, quite broad, but the more we kind of progressed with Speckle, the more we kind of narrowed it down technically, and we've broadened kind of the potential of Speckle as a platform itself technologically at the same time. So we're designing kind of lower and lower level building blocks that help companies kind of scaffold entire digital data-driven workflows, if you want, on top of Speckle.
Interesting.
Yeah, and why we do this, it's like Matteo says this quite well. It's because we always found that, these kind of building blocks, they always tend to be recreated within companies. So it's the same problems of getting a line from Rhino into Revit and then accessing the length of that line from an API, for example,
Why did you start this project? How come? How happened? Can you please tell us a little bit how the story was?
Yeah, this is a long story, Like, it involves back channel deals with me and Matteo drinking beers in pubs in London, like after office hours. But yeah, I mean, originally it started InnoChain, this Horizon 2020 EU-funded project, kind of had this very broad assignment that I took on. Their question was, the question there was, digital design communication is full of friction inside of the AEC industry. What can we do about it, right? And that's a very broad question. Like, where do you start? Like, what's causing this friction? Is it existing software? Is it the existing standards? Is it the existing tech? So, and furthermore, like, what does collaboration mean? Like, how should collaboration shape up in this industry? So Speckle started simply as a kind of a way to define this problem. Like, here's a potential solution. Like, what do you as an industry think? And move forward from there, right? Yeah, and slowly, it evolved from that just by virtue of it being open source, users stumbled over Speckle, and it kind of spread beyond its original kind of intentions as a research project. Right. It's also, I think, because we were kind of driven to make a very usable product rather than something that is the standard academic code, which is, write once, run once, and then forget about it. That's a start of the story, so to say.
Yeah. Okay. Let me dig a little bit deeper even. You said that you were talking about this drinking beer after work. What kind of work were you doing before this?
That's an interesting question that helps us, connect the dots behind the history of Speckle. And I still remember when the time I was at Foster & Partners here in London, that's when I first heard about Speckle. I saw some videos on YouTube, and I was quite impressed because, this solution that let people, I think the very first iterations were very different from what we have now, but let people use sliders in the browser to control their grasshopper definitions. View, these 3D parametric models online was quite cool at the time, and one of the first implementations that I ever saw. And the new features were being added. It was becoming quite similar to what Flux was at the time, even though Flux started after Speckle's inception. And so, at the time I was at Foster's, I was working on some internal projects that were quite similar to Speckle. I saw a lot of parallels with Dimitrie, and I was trying to get to collaborate more and more. Unfortunately, that didn't happen within the company. There was some collaboration outside, some beers cross work. Dimitrie was still at UCL at the time. And how did things evolve from there? I think I switched jobs. I joined Arup, and over there they were relying on Flux quite a lot. But what happened is that Flux suddenly disappeared, died, and they were looking for an alternative. And that's where we managed to get Dimitrie to join, and Aro put quite some internal efforts in supporting the platform in the long term. They used to develop some internal solutions, but as well, they supported the platform and the project overall.
Yeah, by offering me a job, right? So also that's thanks to Matteo's help, obviously. But essentially my fellowship ended, so that was that. And then I was essentially looking for a home for Speckle. And with Matteo's help, Caro provided a very nice home for us, essentially to work on Speckle and develop it further as an open source project, right?
Interesting. But are you still working in Arup, or now you are focusing 100% on the project?
We're focusing 100% of the project. Both me and Matteo, we saw the pandemic coming, and we said that this is the best time ever to start a company around an open source project. So this is when I think April, getting to be a year now. That we established a company fully around Speckle to focus on it 100%, and also be able to kind of serve the wider industry without kind of having difficult conversations around why are you helping our competitors, why are our competitors using the same software as us, all these kind of tricky discussions.
The only sustainable way to satisfy, to accomplish Speckle's mission and vision was to become an independent body. So we could, really support everybody from really large enterprises in AC, startups, vendors, and in even companies that, are outside AC. So there's such a variety of interests and needs in this industry, and only as an independent company would have been able to support or try to support them all.
Yeah. Dimitrie, are you, your background is as a software developer, or?
No, partly yes, but our backgrounds are very similar. I think both me and Matteo, we were laughing that in high school, we were doing PHP, WordPress theme development and stuff like this. Then we studied architectural engineering. But I think both of us always wanted to kind of keep on coding. So that's my background. So
as an architect. So you are okay. So you are an architect, and Matteo also an architect.
Likewise, I studied this hybrid engineering and architecture in Italy. but as Dimitri was saying, I enjoyed much more hacking and trying to automate my own work rather than designing or being creative. So actually my first job was at Case, a BIM consultancy based in New York. After that, I joined the WeWork crew for a bit, and then the Foster Partners and the R&D development team, and then Arup was my last job prior to Speckle. And always my role has been a bit of a software developer with AEC experience, so always trying to automate, improve existing workflows, developing desktop software, web solutions as well. And yeah, that was a great context to to bring into Speckle.
Yeah, that sounds good. Now that we made a proper introduction, please show me a little bit around the website and dive a little bit deeper into the software.
Yes, I will try. As I said, we don't really have a working demo ready yet, but yeah, that's a big item on our to-do. Yeah.
We have a working version of Speckle. We just haven't prepared proper videos and demo videos of the platform, let's say.
Yeah, so I mean, the website is the website. Like, what kind of the two main things that we need to communicate about Speckle very clearly now is that Speckle is both kind of there's a kind of end user product idea attached to it, which is mostly kind of centered around interoperability. And here, this is like kind of where all kind of our clients and are trying to kind of, connect all the possible dots of AEC together. This is, of course, kind of a work that will never finish. Then there's also stuff around collaboration as a product as well. So where we kind of allow people to share this data and manage this data in a kind of constructive way, or kind of in a way that kind of fits AEC. This is something that we're trying to identify the best patterns that the industry wants to share this data with. And then again, like providing extra stuff around kind of versioning and branching. This is kind of more advanced stuff, detailed parts of the Speckle as a product. But then there's an important part of Speckle kind of as a developer platform, because in order for us to build all these beautiful things, what we need to do is to build the lower level building blocks. And this is where we're kind of putting again a lot of effort now into kind of creating a very user-friendly, or let's say developer-friendly kind of set of SDKs and patterns that you can follow to essentially like create apps or kind of scaffold automation scripts on top of data in Speckle and kind of generally extend the platform in any way you want.
Yeah, as developers of the AEC industry ourselves, we want Speckle to really be a platform that makes other developers' lives easier when having to deal with existing AEC software. So whether you have to extract data from a Revit model, whether you have to create objects in a platform or consume some APIs, we want that to be almost a pleasant experience.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe a good example here is like Claire, a member of our team. She just made this guide, like Rhino to Revit, like how to essentially take a very simple kind of Rhino model and like with a few simple clicks, get it out into Revit in a kind of super clean, more or less clean BIM model, right? And the guide has several steps. Whatever, you create streams, you select the data you want to do. So these are all kind of other concepts that Speckle brings to the table around kind of data curation and so on and so forth. And once you follow all these things, what you end up with is kind of like a very solid, Revit model, a BIM model. But kind of going beyond that, like the cool thing is like once you have this data in Speckle, is that it's not just stuck into Rhino or Revit. It's kind of being exposed as an API. And this is where kind of Speckle, the collaborative and the developer platform starts to shine. So that was the previous model that you probably saw. And this is, for example, the same model, or I think it's the same model displayed in the browser, right? So this is one thing that you can do. Obviously, this is not just kind of 3D information. It's also kind of like everything is, accessible via the API in a very kind of nice way, or so we like to believe. in which you can actually start doing all sorts of crazy stuff, like picking up, for example, if this model would have come from Revit, for example, you could automatically calculate, the areas of all the rooms, or scaffold extra automation on top of this.
So, sorry for interrupting you. This looks very similar to GitHub. Is this like a GitHub repository for projects?
This is kind of where we're struggling a bit. Yes, ultimately, yes. So in the backend of Speckle, where we have gone with version 2, we have literally, copy-pasted is giving us too little credit and possibly doing a disservice to Git. But we do have essentially a fully functioning version control model for object-based kind of 3D information, let's say. So ultimately, what you see, yes, commits, objects are immutable. They're described by their hashes. These things are they're going to commits. These commits are associated with an author. They have a specific timestamp. You can go back in history as much as you want. We're starting to scaffold kind of extra ways of tagging these versions of slicing and dicing through this data. One of this is branches. We plan to add releases in the future because this is kind of a big thing. Like you want to know, on February 21st, this is the final thing that I delivered to the contractor. This is the data that I delivered at that specific point in time. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities. We're kind of going very cautious in this direction because we don't know what the best models are, right? So for us, Git models and GitHub-like models come very easily to mind and kind of natively. We're still not sure if we should call commits versions or versions we should call them commits. So there are these kind of things, but this is where we're continuously trying to have a dialogue with our community and figure out what the best things are to do, right?
Nice.
Yeah, and we see Git has a very good analogy, but I think Speckle goes beyond that, as it has on top of that, of course, a very powerful interoperability platform that allows to convert data from a different variety of sources like Rhino, Revit, Grasshopper, Dynamo, Unity. We're working on Unreal and Excel connectors, Blender. So we are trying really to target the main software of our ecosystem. And as well, there's additional features that are specific for the AC. So you can create web apps on top of Speckle and really leverage the data that comes from these softwares. What else?
Just by saying web apps, like you open up a lot of things, for example, and how is, yeah.
Sorry, I just want to mention briefly that we see the Speckle as a technological layer for the AC industry where everybody can build additional intelligence on top of, for instance, you could also see it as a DevOps platform at some point, right? Where you push the data, but then you process it with extra intelligence custom to you, and then you get this data back transformed or, results or however you want it.
Yeah, true. There's plenty of kind of stuff that you can build on top of Speckle. We don't know what these are, and this is why we're kind of making a big effort in making sure that we have an extensible platform that can empower other developers inside the AEC industry to build on top on, right? Like simply, just being able to view your Revit model in a browser without using Forge, for example, or without, going through kind of other hacky solutions, and without being just a 3D model, like to be able to actually look at all the data that's in here and possibly scaffold various automation routines on top of that, or like kind of derive by process workflows coming from here. This is stuff that we're trying to enable with Speckle. Both, these data-driven workflows that we mentioned quite a lot, we see them both as happening between people. So that's, I think, kind of at the core of what collaboration means in AEC, but also like between kind of, let's say, autonomous agents, right? Where you can start having scripts running in the background, executing whenever data changes and so on and so forth.
Interesting. Now, let me ask you something that I don't know how you will like this or not, but what is your stance on IFC?
We get this question asked so many times, and it's funny, I don't have this draft here, but I get it. Yeah, what stands on IFC? How to put it nicely and politely? It's going to sound maybe possibly impolite, but ultimately we don't care. So Speckle is object model agnostic. We see IFC just yet another object model that's kind of very valuable to the industry in the sense that it provides a certain rigorosity that without it, I think we'll be worse off. Where we come is from a different direction. So where IFC wants to be a universally complete standard, Speckle's approach is one to support multiple standards in the same way that you see these objects here that almost look like a JSON file. You can create a schema pretty much out of any of these objects, however you define them. And Speckle goes in the opposite direction principally as IFC in a sense, right? So I said IFC wants to be a complete universal standard. Speckle says, no, I actually want to define a set of very few elements that then end users can organically, dynamically combine together and create higher order meaning based on these structures. So I can rant a lot on this. I mean, if you go to kind of communication studies, this has been what has been proven since the 50s, 60s, and so on, is that kind of the language we use to talk continuously evolves, right? In the course of a conversation and in the course of relationships between people. So if you apply this to AC, you can say that, yeah, as I first start discussing how do I share my Revit model with a, let's say, steel manufacturer, like I'm going to start sending the whole IFC file. But later down the line, you would understand that, okay, this steel beam manufacturer just needs the center line, the type of beam, and a couple of extra properties around that. And this is something that IFC doesn't allow you to do. And this is where we, I think, differ principally. At the same time, though, to reiterate, we do support it. So we have had, we've worked with Dennis Sheldon to create a version of IFC JSON that's in Speckle, version 1.0 actually. That worked out nicely, actually, so there's no detriment to that. So that's where we stand, pretty much. We're trying to open up the kind of whole standards debacle into, it's a bit of a Pandora's box that we're having quite a bit of fun opening up and seeing what happens. And trying this as a challenge to the industry, more or less.
Yeah, that sounds fair enough. Matteo, do you have anything to add to this, or?
No, it's pretty much what Dimitrie said. We are actually working with some university trying to see if how easily now we can get IFC through the current iteration of Speckle. Technically there is no limitation. It's more an amount of resources required for creating these converters, this implementation. That's the main problem of IFC. It's a great standard, but doesn't have implementations that are openly accessible. So if I want to to convert IFC to Revit, I don't think there's anything out there that we could leverage.
And it's also, there's a matter of fact that the level of fidelity that is expected from Speckle at the moment for this kind of interoperability solution, like kind of IFC hits it and misses it at the same time. So, and that's not per se IFC's fault. It's the fault of the software vendors ultimately, right? Always have quirky implementations, like a curtain panel, let's say wall, is implemented in a very specific way in Revit with extra features that only exist in Revit. And what users want to do is to be able to easily create that thing in Rhino or in Grasshopper, because Revit is such a clunky software when it comes to modeling things, right? And the changes are very difficult to operate. And that's why we come with a very kind of, let's say, pragmatic object model by default, right? Which helps us solve these interoperability challenges and move fast.
Although I know IFC is not ideal and it has many issues, but like you said already, it's much better than not have it, right? But I'm still thinking it becomes more and more popular to be required by more and more clients on projects. So it's definitely something that I don't think is going to be left behind anytime soon, at least until we get something much better, maybe.
No, of course. We're not planning to replace IFC. It's just so we have actually plans to be able to ingest IFC inside Speckle. And we also have plans later down the line to potentially be able to directly export IFC files from Speckle. That's another kind of problem we have with IFC, it being kind of a very file-centric format, Speckle being very kind of like totally object-based. There's some conflicts there, but there's nothing that's not surmountable. And ultimately, it's just a matter of processing this data into a shape that end users need, right?
Yeah. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, we talk a lot, so take care. And also, this is like you've reached the subject of like 200 pages of PhD thesis and endless discussions with Matteo and so on. So,
I think one important thing to underline here that, as Dimitrie already mentioned, is the flexibility that Speckle allows in terms of schema. So when you install Speckle and you use it, it defaults to a schema that we call objects. It contains all the basic geometry entities, like point lines, meshes, breadths as well. It has some basic definition for BIM elements, especially for dealing with Revit. But the great thing of object is that it's totally extensible, so you can either fork it and add your own entities on top of it, or you can create your own schemas from scratch. So company XYZ, if they have, a lot of big companies already have their internal schemas for dealing with, custom interoperability or workflows. They could just take their existing schema, add a few Speckle specific properties, and then that would work out of the box with any Speckle connectors. And that's just to fall back to what Dimitrie was saying earlier. We are not trying to force anyone into using a specific schema or object model. Speckle is completely schema agnostic.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's address a little bit people that don't really know what open source is. What does this mean, that Speckle is an open source software for other AEC professionals?
I think now there's this thing that was buzzing through my head in the past few days, and I think it's very important, and I think it's worth mentioning it. That to me, one of the most important things of being open source is that Speckle as a project, it will never die. So even if our company was not to exist in a few years, Speckle will always be there. So that, to me, that's the most promising thing of the project itself, and why people should get involved and should start using it and checking it out, is that Speckle will never die. Speckle will always exist as a project. Code base is on GitHub. It can't be taken down. So that's the number one thing about open sourceness that excites me.
Yes, and just to contrast that to, for example, other, let's say, cloud solutions that exist in the industry, which are number one closed source. So you'll never see the software behind them, right? The actual code. That means they're much more difficult to extend. And if you extend them, you just enrich a closed source ecosystem. And on top of that, three is like what Matteo said now, like it's, if suddenly something happens to that closed service, your data is gone or whatever. And it's also a question of data, let's say, ownership and data residency, which is kind of a big deal nowadays, like data sovereignty. Who owns the data? Where is my data? You get these questions asked a lot, right? With Speckle, you always have an answer to this, like, okay, where do you want it to be? And that's where the data can be, right? It's not, you always have an exit and the backup.
Yeah, and your data is not being mined for commercial purposes. It's not being sold to third parties, especially in the case you deploy and host your own Speckle server. It's entirely your own property. We started recently offering hosted Speckle servers, but in any case, we're not doing anything with our customized data. It's always their own property.
Yes, and the questions that we usually lead these kind of conversations is like, okay, where do you want us to host this data for you, right?
Exactly.
Or like, actually, can't your IT department just do this? And like, we don't need to just maybe help you initially to set things up, and then we can just step back, right? So that's it.
But I think another very valid point on the open source agenda is really, trying to be this force that disrupts the industry. So far, across all the various positions I held in the ACE industry as a professional, I've seen, this tendency of seeing innovation and new technologies as proprietary IP, as secrets that can't be shared. And the consequence of this behavior is simply, the detrimental for the industry, is that it's super slow to advance as a collective, adopt new technologies and use them. And there's a lot of duplication of effort. So many companies that have their own interop solutions, their own web viewers. It's insane. And just like the tech industry, is making huge progresses thanks to open source projects that have been released by major, companies like Google, Amazon, and now even Microsoft, it's become the major open source contributor in the tech industry. We see open source as the solution to this problem, to this stagnancy of tech in AEC.
Yeah, I mean, I brought this up, like, I don't know if it's like we wrote a blog post on this, like, what does kind of conceptually open source mean for us, right? And why we're sticking to it, and why also, yeah, it's like really key to our mission and to our success essentially as well. And it's funny though, like, I mean, if we start thinking about this, we get like some very weird requests. There's a certain kind of lack of understanding in the industry of what actually open source means. A lot of people think it's like kind of a hippie kind of commune in a garage writing software that's insecure and it's gonna, steal your credit card data, whereas actually it's, quite the contrary. It's like there's much more eyes on open source code than on proprietary code, and as well, like, there's another message there that we want this to be valid for everybody, right? We want everybody to equally participate in creating value based on kind of digital workflows, and not just kind of get these things or leave these things under the exclusive purview of Autodesk, Bentley, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah. But from, let's say there is a user that would be interested to use Speckle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's free to download, right? What he or she needs to do in order to start using it? What is the workflow?
Yeah, it's not that easy. I mean, it's not that easy. Sorry, it's not that difficult. Though it could be easier. I think that's the correct way of saying it. What they just need to do is like click the join the beta kind of here. And for now, actually just join the waiting list. Like maybe for the listeners on your podcast, we can show the secret shortcut. They can just go to speckle.xyz and they just need to log in with Google or whatever, create an account. I hope I didn't register this email address. I did anyway. What will happen is that they will essentially be sent this nice onboarding screen, which is like 4 steps, and they can simply get going.
Yeah, this is our general availability server, which is, it's free forever for all the individuals using it. And it's just a matter, as Dimitrie was describing, creating an account, downloading the connectors, installing them, and then they're ready to go. There's really no extra complexity. And that, that recommended setup for most users. If instead you're part of a larger company where you'd like to have Speckle, deployed as internally, there's, a variety of solutions there, some a bit more complicated, but, in that case, it'd be best discussed with their IT department. But there's a variety of ways in which you could use Speckle. You could even just run it locally on your machine, inside a Docker container, and just that's it. It's entirely up to you how you want to use it.
Yeah, so pretty much, just download the stuff, install the connectors for Rhino and Revit, and then just open Rhino or Revit or Grasshopper or Dynamo or whatever, or Blender, and send something out just for the thrill of seeing it in 3D in a browser with all its information attached to it, right? And then try receiving it back out in a different software. That's those would be like kind of like the first 2 exciting steps that you can take with Speckle, I think.
Yeah.
And then obviously it's cool when you start sharing this stuff. So anyway, there's many ways to go about it.
Maybe it sounds too good to be true. How do you earn any money to pay salaries to your employees then, if everything is free?
Yes, everything is free, but open source does not mean free. So this is one thing that we've realized, actually, that the cost of actually deploying Speckle servers internally inside an AEC enterprise
And maintaining them.
and maintain them and update them and keep everything, ensuring that they're up and running and that they're not, there's not any downtime just before a deadline. Like, we got angry emails on this. Anyway, and there was nothing we can do because they were not servers maintained by us, right? We're like, oops. So these costs can, for a kind of medium enterprise, could spiral out of control if you count into account the ITFs. Like, they can be upwards of £60,000 a year, right? Like, just paying people's time to maintain and deploy and update Speckle servers. So this is where we have Speckle Enterprise offering, right? Which currently is doing just that. It's essentially saying, we will take care of managing the Speckle servers for you. You will have a stable version. You will have a bleeding edge version so that you can test the latest features that we're pushing out weekly. And we'll ensure that these things stay online and that they won't crash before your deadline, right? In the past, we got very random stuff on our former Slack group that we're not using anymore, but we were getting things like, hey, Speckle is not working. And, after half an hour of discussion, you realize that Speckle is not working because Speckle previously was working on his coworker's computer under the desk, and that respective person went on holiday and shut down his computer.
It's a true story.
Yes, it's a true story. And then, this is where essentially you start understanding that there's a cost to open source, right? It's not necessarily monetary. It can be effort of deployment. So this is how we plan to make money, simply put. It's
SaaS.
By supporting, with support, through support,
yes,
helping companies to maintain and deploy servers.
exactly. Yes, and as well, going beyond that, we might, because there's another thing, a lot of kind of Arup and a lot of other companies have been developing, EchoDale, for example, have been developing closed source stuff on top of Speckle, like applications. You might have seen the Arup Carbon tool. That's a closed source application that does some very fast embodied carbon calculations on data inside Speckle. And we're planning to possibly in the future also develop some sort of kind of applications on top of Speckle that we might offer at a cost.
This is very similar to the WordPress business model, where WordPress is entirely free, or GitLab, and then you monetize on add-ons, plugins.
Yeah.
Exactly, on top of the platform.
And then even there, our vision as a kind of open source first company is that, we will have closed source stuff like this application, I don't know, let's say just automate cost calculation on Rhino models, for example, or whatever, and totally, we might actually do that. Anyway, we will have these kind of closed source applications, but as we progress and as kind of the future of the project is becoming sustainable, just like GitHub kind of kept on, initially in GitHub, you could have no private repositories for free, right? Then a couple of years later, you suddenly have them for free. And always when they said this, it was because they had enough enterprise customers and they were in a good enough position that they are now being able to make free what previously was coming at a cost. So that's our kind of vision here. As we reach sustainability as a company, we're going to open source any closed source stuff that we're going to make, right? This ensures that also incentives are aligned, right? We can't have, as you said, we need to pay salaries. So
yeah, of course. But anyway, there is going to be a free version, right? For the geekiest person,
it's
who
always
just
gonna
want
be there. Yeah,
to do it themselves, they can do it, right? So it's
of
just
course.
if you want to have more security and be sure that everything works as expected. But if there is an individual, maybe me, if I want to learn how Speckle works or something, there will be a way to try to do that, right?
Totally.
Speckle,
yeah.
The platform, the core of the platform, so that what it is now, especially, will always be free and open source. We don't want to compromise on that. If there's going to be any closed or just source available feature, it's always going to be on top of Speckle, like across.
Okay.
Yes, and pretty much so far, like 99.999% of everything, every code that we've written is open source. And we also see, I think, kind of going forward, yeah, I mean, we don't see any reason, like we would be kind of doing ourselves a disservice if we would make it difficult for geeks like you, for example, to start jumping on Speckle.
Yeah, we've even released a bunch of tools, and we're planning to release more that are not part of the Speckle platform, but they're open source, just because we think other people could benefit from them. So one is the the Grasshopper async component.
That we use as a base, and the XUnit Revit tester.
Yeah.
No.
So tools for Grasshopper and Revit that we just believe that the rest of the community or the industry could benefit from, and really that just goes back into our mission and vision. That's why Speckle exists. That's why the company behind Speckle exists, and that's what we want to do and continue doing.
So nice.
Yeah, let's see if we survive.
You must do it, right? It's important. Like we need more companies with this approach, not driven just to close the AEC environment as much as possible.
Yes, we agree with that sentiment. It's true. I mean, we do not doubt the success of Speckle as an open source project. If anything is a doubt, it's the business around it.
Cash flow for business. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I know. It's a startup. I know how it is. What is the background of most of your users so far? Are there mostly engineers or architects or project managers, or who is using mostly this?
Computational designers, to be honest. So I think across all these disciplines, some computational designers in project management roles, some, go ahead, Matteo.
It's mostly if you're dealing with data in your daily job, you're most likely going to benefit from Speckle. Speckle really enhances any data-driven workflow. So as Dimitrie was saying, despite of the discipline you might be working with, architecture, geotechnical, engineering, MEP, it doesn't really matter. If you have a need of dealing with data, especially across different softwares, then Speckle is a great solution.
Can you tell me some use cases that most of the users are giving you feedback about? Like they said that, yeah, we use this mostly for this and it works awesome. What is the most obvious use cases, let's say?
I think we have an assorted collection of tweets that we're kind of keep on trying to keep track of, and many unpublished use cases. But go ahead, Matteo. Yeah,
I think number one that I have personally seen, and I think it's been daunting our industry forever, and we're hopefully finally providing a free and good solution to, is the interop between Grasshopper and Rhino to Revit. So that's a process that's never been fully supported by any vendors. It's never been free or easily accessible. Now we have full support of all the basic geometry. So even BREPs, they get transferred to Revit as native Revit geometry, but also Revit families can be generated now from our Grasshopper and Rhino connectors. So that mostly, I would say, for architects, it's been a major challenge because they really like to spend their concept design stage in freeform modeling platforms like Rhino, but then they find the struggle that they can't really replicate some of these shapes easily and natively from Revit, and having something that lets them transfer, automatically regenerate these forms is extremely valuable. So that maybe is number one use case. But
yeah, I mean, interoperability just definitely generates the most excitement. It's like, oh wow, look, I clicked 3 buttons, and this problem, this tedious file export now just takes 5 seconds, right? There's another kind of use case that's a bit more long-winded to express, is like that we kind of, I think it's more closely to our soul, and we've seen Speckle like adopted by, for example, Arup and Royal Haskoning as kind of a digital platform that they can scaffold essentially all their digital efforts on top of. and they use Speckle kind of as the glue in between all their workflows. And this comes from integrating structural analysis software with Rhino, with SAP, with custom actually analysis routines written in Python, and so on and so forth. And all these things kind of orchestrating kind of like workflows around like the Rotterdam Feyenoord Stadium, for example, or like the what was it, the Melbourne Metro coming from Arup. There were other cool projects that we're never allowed to share, like around Euston in the UK. And this is where we see Speckle used both as an interoperability platform and both kind of as a kind of automation base, and kind of expresses its true digital identity, in which like, oh, wow, look, it's not only interoperability, it's actually interoperability plus plus. You can actually process this data and shape it and generate PDF reports automatically from Revit models and stuff like this. So
yeah, Speckle is a bit of a Swiss knife, right? There's no limit to what you can do with it.
Yeah, but I think the use case of Speckle as a kind of construction cloud, if you may, or like that anybody can customize, I think that's what excites me the most when I see that happening. This is what gives me hope for the future. And there's other use cases, like kind of a BIM consultancy in Germany, Ecodale, developed this software called BIA3D that's based on Speckle 1.0. And what it does is kind of like validation of data, ensuring that your BIM models have the correct kind of fire safety rating stuff attached on top of them, and all that jazz. There's applications that we saw based on like security door analysis. So basically for data centers, if I'm not mistaken. So basically just ensuring that all doors in a building have the correct security requirements attached to them based on the functional zones around them. It's again like kind of seeing that as a web app built on top of Speckle. Yeah, it's quite cool, right? So this is what excites us the most.
Interesting. You mentioned communication as well between teams and such. Are you using in any way BCF here, or
I will let the father of BC Fire, Matteo Cominetti, discuss this.
Yeah, it's funny that you ask. Actually, BCF was one of my earliest projects when I was at Case at the very beginning of my career. For those listening who don't know about BCF, it's the team collaboration format that was started by Building Smart, and what BCF is trying to solve is the problem, and again on communication around issues or problems in a building. So similarly to how in Git you have issue tracking, BCF was seen as an attempt to be able to track issues, problems, organize them in a structured format that could be easily communicated and shared together with the model. As I was mentioning at the beginning of my career, I developed BC Fire that Dimitrie is now showing, the first plugin for Revit that could handle BCF files, so create them and open them. To answer your question, we're planning to integrate with BCF at some point, as many other vendors have done. It will for sure be able to ingest BCF, maybe export them, but internally they will be handled maybe a bit in custom ways. But we totally see, power in supporting it, as we were talking about before. If Speckle is Git for AEC, having support for issue tracking is a natural evolution of the platform itself.
Yeah, and that's something that's actually on our roadmap coming soon. So
nice.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned a roadmap. What do you have on your roadmap, guys?
What do we have on our roadmap? Let me pull it up. We're hesitant about publishing roadmaps because they become
obsolete very quickly.
Yes, exactly. They're very static documents that tend to become obsolete rather fast. So, I'll start with what we see as stable. And by stable, I mean that it entered kind of like long-term support. So it's going to receive continuous improvements. It's not done. Nothing is ever done. So yeah, Revit, Rhino, Dynamo, all this stuff. They're more or less stable, fingers crossed. What we're now pushing for a lot is essentially documentation, right? And some other improvements on the connector side and kind of shoring up our interoperability layer, making sure it's smooth. And then, yes, in the backlog, where essentially the exciting stuff is essentially a C++ SDK that's essentially going to feed in an Unreal connector. This is, we recently got a Epic Mega Grant. So this is for developing these two cards here that we actually just started on. So there should be maybe in progress. Anyway, see, as I said, roadmaps become
Doing our
expired.
planning today, so I was part of it.
True. Anyway, then we have Excel connector. A lot of people demand it, so we want to see SketchUp again. Integrating with structural software. This is something where we're a bit behind when it comes to 1.0 parity. We don't yet have integrations for those. And other random stuff like supporting point clouds, blocks, structural objects. Then we have a lot of kind of stuff that we want to develop on the backend, on the server side of Speckle, which they go to actually help creating kind of applications on top of Speckle at the same level of complexity, such as like Circle CI on Jenkins, or like being able to run automated checks on Speckle data. And this is why we have webhooks in here, and activity stream notifications, admin panels, so that if you're an admin of a server, that you can actually kind of manage a bit better, like what's going on inside that server without actually poking in the database, which is currently the only way you can do it. Yeah, improvements for the 3D viewer. These roadmaps are sometimes like depressing as hell, to be honest, and it's a sunny Monday. So there's a lot that we want to do, right?
Yeah.
Yes, these are
Can you
some of
scroll
these
up
issues.
a little bit?
Yeah,
Scroll
I
up a
can.
little bit.
Yes.
Blender connector. What's the status
Yes.
on that one?
Actually, if you would have been to our stand-up, our community stand-up last Wednesday, I think, it's good. It's working. It receives data. Like essentially the 1.0 connector is developed by Tom Svillens. The 1.0 connector was developed by Tom Svillens. Now the 2.0 connector is still developed by Tom Svillens, but Easy, our first hire, is helping him out. And yeah, she's also, I think, possibly prodding Tom into doing more. Anyway, so the status of the Blender connector is quite, let's just say, reaching maybe an early beta stage, if I'm to be, let's say, optimistic about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also planning to integrate with Dion Mult's BlenderBIM. So this is actually, yeah, with BlenderBIM. This is kind of on our sprint. We just added it for this next 2 weeks task list, is to look, because I think if we have a Blender connector already, actually integrating with what BlenderBIM does is not such a huge step. So yeah, it might be an easier connection than we think there.
Okay, yeah, that's very nice.
Yeah. So BlenderBIM is part of the Blender connector card, so to say.
Yeah, and we'd love to investigate, connecting with other open source AC and BIM tools like FreeCAD. I know not a lot of our current users are users of FreeCAD, but as soon as there's more interest, we would definitely love to push for it.
Yeah, but listen, if you are still going to do this thing with BlenderBIM, there might be another very smart Blender add-on to connect it with, which is Sverchok, which is an equivalent. Yeah, it's an equivalent of Grasshopper for Blender. Okay. And that's free, of course. So because Grasshopper right now, if you want to learn and you want to do it on your own, you don't have it on your company, it's not so, like, you need to purchase first Rhino, right?
Yes.
So this would be very affordable, not very affordable, free, right? Everybody who wants to try to learn would have access to it. So yeah, it would be really nice.
Yeah, thanks for pointing it out, because we're like sometimes lost. Like there's a lot of people screaming for Civil 3D integrations, which we have, but we still have to improve for like ETABS, SAP, SketchUp. So we get bombarded from all directions, like strange geological analysis software that you've never heard of, then other strange analysis software that you've never heard of. And we can miss obvious things such as the Grasshopper of Blender. So that's,
yeah. For me, this is very important. Like I said, why? Because like if you want to learn AutoCAD or Revit or something, it's easy to do that. You can get a license as a student or something. I don't know if you want to do that, right? But if you don't want to get involved in Autodesk environment and you want something free, Zverchok is the only
alternative,
and Blender, right? So it's very nice. It would be very nice to have this possibility to integrate it. Yeah.
Nice.
Cool.
I did not ask about how big is the team? Your team? Are you only you two and plus one, or?
I think we're yeah. Go ahead.
No, we're 7 people now.
Yeah.
Currently 6, but one is joining soon, so we'll soon be 7. Yeah, we're not planning on growing much more for now. It's a very good team, quite diversified backgrounds. Most of us are, basically, yeah, most of us are going to be software engineers with a background in AC, quite different backgrounds. So that's really helpful when, having to tackle different softwares like all the ones that we just mentioned.
Yes, and right now I think we've reached the team, the size that we're comfortable with and that we can progress at the speed that we want to. So we're not necessarily planning to grow. But though, like if anybody listening in feels like they would want to join the Speckle mission, please reach out to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But is there any way that because it's open source, like other people can contribute to the project, right?
Of course.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. This is always like we've always been open to contributions. And I don't know if you've seen maybe when I was spinning the 3D models around earlier on Speckle.xyz, the section box, you might have noticed it, like me chopping up a model.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, that's a contribution from Nick, who works in the US, and that's so we're definitely open, right? It's more of a matter like what we found is like sometimes contributions are difficult to come by, and it's difficult to request them because it's a big time commitment. It's work that you essentially do for free. And it's also sometimes Speckle can be like kind of as a whole system can be a bit daunting. So you would have to read through quite a few bits of code until you would be able to kind of make, to have the courage to make a contribution. And that's why essentially we should improve here, actually. I think this is something that we need to work on. Like, how will we be more friendly to external contributions in a sense? Currently, that's a big effort from our side as well. Be able to scope and define problems in a fixed way, in a kind of very easy to follow way. Now we're at the stage where if we do that, we probably already fixed the problem because it's much easier for us.
Yeah.
But going down the line, we see ourselves trying to be more engaging on the contribution side.
And an area in which we're looking for contributions a lot is really developing new connectors. In this case, we're looking for skilled developers that are looking to develop and also maintain these connectors. Of course, given the increasing number, it's going to be hard down the line for us to manage and maintain all of these connectors. But if people like Tom, take on some of these, that's amazing. So, and here we're also looking at vendors and AC companies. So we're having some. Well, I'm not going to say the name. We're having some early conversation with some vendors. Hopefully they will lead to some official Speckle connectors that could be maintained by them.
Interesting.
Rather than by us. Yeah.
Finger crossed with that.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
What programming languages are is Speckle friendly with that if somebody is interested to contribute?
So the canonical SDK, let's say, is .NET, C# specifically, and that's where kind of most of our connectors are also implemented in. We have a very good and popular 2.0 Python SDK, which is what is used in the Blender connector. And then everything that you see essentially that has to do with the internet, so from the backend server to the viewer, is JavaScript. So this is our current stack.
And we're planning on developing a C++ SDK that will mainly target Unreal, but we don't know, it will probably hopefully open doors to additional connectors to be developed if C++ is a requirement.
Like ArchiCAD, yeah. Though, like, I mean, we're dubious about C++ because there's not many people that are enthusiastic about C++ in the industry. So
or that know it at all.
Yes.
Yeah, it's more complicated, more difficult.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hardcore.
That's the correct word.
Well, I finished my questions, guys.
Awesome.
Do you think
Okay.
I missed anything that you would like to mention now at the end?
I would like to encourage anyone listening who might have any curiosity, questions, feedback on Speckle to get in touch. And the best way to do so is through the community forum, which Dimitrie could quickly open. Oh, no, he's on the motion. But that's where, we're encouraging all the conversations to happen and, ranging from ideas, bug reports, feedback, or even, just a rant on, on whatever AC related that, we're really encouraging conversations there.
Sorry, I had it open, and you can, that's speckle.community. It's super easy to
remember,
find.
easy to access, and to use.
Yeah, that's it. And also, like, engage here. This is one place. GitHub is another place. It's there's many points of engagement. If you're curious, just join the beta waiting list, or like just let us know, and we'll send you an invite. And I mean, yeah, the point is we're trying to build this for the greater good of AEC as a whole, as an industry. So the more the merrier. Contributions are welcome, both code-wise and as well kind of feature-wise and bug-wise. This is something that we appreciate a lot. Yes, and this is something that maybe is missed a lot. We don't count contributions only as code. Like, some of the most valuable contributions we've got have been like, hey, you've missed this critical bug fix, or hey, this works really strangely in Revit. Why doesn't it work like this, right? Which are things that, make Speckle. Yes, exactly. And these are as valuable for us as lines of code, right? Because
absolutely,
they reinforce each other. So yeah, that's cool. No, thanks for having us, Petru. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining me. It was very nice to talk to you guys. I wish you good luck, and I hope you'll still be here in 50 years.
Yeah, we hope so too.
Yes.
The company. I mean the company. You will definitely be. Why not 2100?
Yes, wow. We hope so too.
Thank you.